Hey everybody, so glad that you could join us today. My name is Javan Bernakevitch with All Points Design. That's allpointsdesign.ca. I'm in a very nice chair, and so I'm swiveling back and forth. It's my partner's chair. I would never buy a chair this fancy, but I really quite like it. So if I get my groove on, that's what's going on. Today, I'm joined by the incredible Jeremy Prentice of Very Edible Gardens. Jeremy and I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago about Wicking Beds, and it was so thoughtful, and it had so many good pieces that I wanted to redo it. That was our dry run and go for it completely, because he's been working with Very Edible Gardens for a couple of years now, right, Jeremy? 2 years or 3 years?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, just over 2 years. Yeah. Yep.
And you've been working with the marketing, the business, the warehouse, a bit of education. And this was all because you were eligible for this work because you had a similar role in a different business, working with African drumming, doing it recreationally and professionally, managing somebody else's business. And before that, you had horticulture. So you had an alternative mindset and used a lot of those zones of brilliance you already had, linear focus, managerial skills, but also a real presence of essence of who you are internally of loving horticulture and loving education. And you just parlayed that directly into Very Edible Gardens Veg.
Yeah, for sure. It's been a privilege of mine that, and I've experienced a lot of serendipity in my life, and certainly professionally, being able to get paid for my passion, and find the passion for what you're doing every day. And veg is, I was going to say no exception, but it's the other way around. Veg is awesome and really fits my ethics, and I get to really explore and as we describe it, make a Jeremy-shaped hole in veg, and veg changes accordingly, which is awesome.
Well, that's incredible. I think if anybody could find something like that, they'd be well suited. And then on the other side, I think for people who have businesses, being able to adopt a lot of the practices and principles that veg has, specifically using things like holistic context and holistic decision making to be able to formulate around individuals who would add so much to a business. And after speaking with Dan Palmer, who's one of the two co-founders, I know that's the case, that when somebody exceptional like you comes in, they want to make sure that you're in autonomy and in mastery, so that way you feel satisfied and you feel fulfilled within that work.
Yeah, that's right. And it's one of the things that's great about veg. And I actually made the comment the other day that I never want to work in a business again that isn't built around the people who are in it. The idea of writing a role and then finding someone to fit it isn't, I'm done with that. And thankfully, veg doesn't work that way. So it's all about the people and how you maximize their strengths and find their passion, because that's what makes life hum, it makes it easy, fun, enjoyable, thrive. All of that stuff just flows.
Awesome.
Which is
awesome.
Cool. Yeah.
Well, we'll probably have to have another conversation about passions and developing passions and zones of brilliance and all the rest of it. But
yeah, otherwise we'll run out of time real fast.
Welcome to the 3-hour interview with Jeremy.
That's right.
So today what we're talking about is Wicking Beds. And the reason I reached out to Germany, it's like you are not both Jeremy and from Germany.
And the country, yeah.
In your country unto yourself. The great nation of Germany is, it's got a little tractor coming by me right now, I was really curious about Wicking Beds. And this is something that I feel like most regenerative agriculturalists, permaculturalists cut their teeth on right at the beginning. And I'd worked with so many people who were direct sow. They were always in the soil. They were always improving the soil. And interesting, when comparing myself with my contemporaries, my level of understanding around soil was probably a bit higher or more complex because I had cut my teeth on it. Whereas I've never built a Wicking Bed still to this day. And a couple of my good colleagues and friends have. And so I wanted to start reaching out and doing these short interviews to understand Wicking Beds from those who've been doing it the longest. So I'd reach out to you, and we started with this question, which I think is a good one, which is, what is your definition, or what's the general understanding for you of what's a Wicking Bed?
Yeah, great question. I like taking that one and sort of twisting it down a slightly different road when I answer this, which is Wicking Bed's a tool for growing great produce or growing great plants. It doesn't have to be produce, but of course, if you can love it and eat it at the same time, then that's a win-win. It helps you succeed where you might otherwise be challenged or possibly even be failing. And you can do all that with using less water and less energy and time for yourself. So that's the why, or that's part of what Wicking Beds really offer as a tool. And the benefits for that, I think, are often still understated in a lot of the information that's around. It's about how to build a bed, which is important, and we'll get to. But the value of having one in your life is often a bit understated, and certainly understanding how to irrigate plants is key to growing them, right, and getting great, healthy plants and good produce. And so Wicking Beds is an irrigation style that really tailors to human behaviour while still fostering great growth in plants, which is a really nice marriage, I suppose, and union of differences, which is great.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. One of the things that you said there that I remember you saying from last time was this idea that it helps new gardeners get through the trials and tribulations of growing early on to get them to the meaty part of growing food and gardening. So they're not dissuaded by the first failures, which has to happen with growing plants. I used to joke that gardener was Latin for plant killer, because anybody who's a gardener has...
That's like one of my jokes. No one's killed more plants than a gardener, an experienced gardener. And anyone who tells you otherwise isn't an experienced gardener or is lying, one of the two,
Right. You're either killing them because you're weeding them, or you're killing them because, it's not the tool, it's the tool who's using it, as my dad liked.
Yeah, exactly. You're still learning. I killed one last week. I'll put my hand up,
Hi, my name's Jeremy. I'm a plant killer.
Yeah.
My name's Javan. I'm a plant killer.
That's right. I try not to, but
But I really appreciated that conversation that you brought, because there's I guess there's a societal conversation of, failure is bad. Failure is the worst thing possible. And that we could talk about that as a programming piece and a acculturation piece. But when it comes to gardening, I think that's even more so, because we're so distant from ecology, from planting, from gardening. And yet here is this really interesting tool. And the way you put it was that plants are on a different schedule. They're on a different cyclical sine wave, as you put it, than we are. And the mechanism of a wicking bed can actually take up some of that misunderstanding, or call it illiteracy, of a plant's watering cycle or life cycle. So that way they can last a little bit longer, and they can be there for you and you can be there for them, as opposed to what usually happens is somebody sticks something in the ground, forgets about it, doesn't water it, it's dead, and they think, I'm a terrible gardener.
Yeah, that's right. It's an interesting phenomenon that you buy plants from a nursery or a garden center or something like that. You take them home, 3 weeks later, something's happened and they've died. You don't go back to the shop and say, hey, you sold me a dud plant. You blame yourself. It's like one of the few products, if you look at it that way, that you don't look at the supply or understanding, because it's a living thing, and we are, as you say, ill-equipped these days to understand living processes, despite the fact that we are one and are continually engaged with them all around us. So having a tool that allows you to experiment a little bit, and all of gardening is experimenting, all of life is experimenting, and it's certainly not, non-linear. It's not this, then this, then this, then that. It's things happening all the time, and there's so much in the dynamic that we don't know, which is exciting and interesting, and helps, get you out there and amongst it and looking at your plants again to see what's going on. But the irrigation one is a water level for plants is really key, because we tend to pay attention a lot at a time when you first put it in the first few days and the week and a half or something like that. And then you go away because you get distracted or excited or something else. And, the plant's responding to that period of less water or neglect, if you like. And then you tune in and you see something, and depending on how experienced your eye is, you might only see changes in your plant growth once it gets to a really magnified stage. So you're not seeing the little subtle nuances and shifts to come back in, when you only need to do a little bit of work to steer it back in a healthy direction. So you come back and you go, oh, my plants are really dry, I better water them. So you water them again really heavily for 3 or 4 days. And so this real ebb and flow of hydrology, effectively, that the plants have access to. And a wicking bed flattens that sine wave, as you mentioned. So rather than it being, there's a watering event and then it tapers off like this, and then a watering event and it tapers off like this, you get this nice flowing, flatter sine wave like that. So the plants have access to that, to their water that they need or that they want most of the time, as well as allowing you to come and touch base, maybe even only once a week in midsummer under full crop for what you've got in your setup, to come through and do your watering in less than 10 minutes, depending on the size of your wicking bed, because you're only topping up the reservoir. And along the way, you get to look at how much water your plants are using. You can think about what the weather's been doing the last 2 weeks and how that's changed, looking at your crop cover. So you can use it, if you tune in and pay attention and choose to, as an educational tool for yourself to understand more of what's happening around you and understand what you're growing and what the results are. Neither good nor bad. It's just what's going on and how do I understand more about it? Which, I mean, for me, that's my primary driver for life. It's like I get up and, all right, what's going on? How do I understand more about it? And can I have a coffee on the way, please? And that's it. I'm happy.
I love that. It occurs to me as you're saying that gardening, in terms of getting people into it, or even people who are into it and moving forward, is understanding that the weak link in gardening is you or me or us. Mm-hmm. And it feels like that is something that I've heard time and time again said by folks who are exceptional at gardening. Locally here, we have a couple of exceptional gardeners, and they say that over and over. I think Sepp Holzer has said it probably the most voraciously of the person that's the problem. And so you take that weak link of attention and understanding, and you built in structures to take up, again, some of that illiteracy, so that way you don't have to be as illiterate or have to be as literate at the beginning. It takes up that illiteracy. So we have a general sense, and I love that from the general definition that wicking beds are just a tool to grow plants more easily. So let's get into the technical aspect. Technically, what is a wicking bed?
Technically, a wicking bed is a bed that has a water reservoir underneath the soil that allows the moisture to travel up from the reservoir into the soil. So it's traveling against gravity, and it's using capillary action or wicking action, which is hence where the name comes from, wicking beds. And capillary action, it sounds like heavy science, but it's something that everybody knows already. When you have a piece of kitchen paper or a dry towel or something like that, and you touch one corner in a puddle of water, and it will travel up, through the paper. That's capillary action. That's it. It's that simple. It's water going between or going through the small spaces between particles, and that happens through the reservoir. It happens through whatever you've got stopping the soil falling into the reservoir, and it happens through the soil. And there's endless examples that people might have come across where they've seen it. You've got a pile of gravel. This happens on our jobs sometimes. A pile of the screenings or gravel. The bottom of it's moist or sitting in a puddle, and you'll see that there's a dark shadow moving up over time, a few hours through the pile. That's the capillary action. That's wicking. That's happening and it happens inside the beds. And that's where that moisture level is always moving up. It's physics. Water's going to do what it's going to do. And so that's always happening inside the bed, providing there's water in the reservoir, of course, and it doesn't get bone dry.
That starts it off. And I'm a big geek about capillary action. It was something that I used to teach in gardening and permaculture workshops about adhesion and cohesion. How they come together to capillary action. The way I explained it was, if you've ever spilt red wine on a white shirt or seen it happen, does that red wine just go down or does it go up and to the sides? And it was great because it was that relatability, and all the students would go, oh, right, it's a 3-dimensional wetting pattern. And that started the conversation for everyone to go, right, so fluid dynamics are such that when experienced with increased surface area, they will resist gravity and they will move up. And I think that's hard for people to realize. I think that's one of those things that when people hear about, they're like, wait a second, I know that gravity goes down, but something resists gravity. And it's not so much resist, it's just that the forces of capillary action are so intense that they move, they're stronger. And so they move in the opposite direction.
That's right. And especially under certain conditions. I mean, that's what's happening inside, the world's tallest trees, which we've got some of here in Victoria, the big mountain ash, a tree over 100 meters, and it's evaporation of moisture off the leaves at the top, that transpiration of the tree, not quite breathing, but losing moisture out of its leaves. That's pulling water through capillary action, that adhesion and cohesion you're talking about, all the way, down into the soil. And that when you start to comprehend that, that's, this force of water holding to itself and that it's drawn to itself, is a really weak bond chemically. But in terms of life generation, it's one of the most fundamental things that's, otherwise we wouldn't be here, and that's also happening in your wicking bed, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. The macro to the micro, the patterns to the details.
Yeah. It's always there. It's all the same, it's just slightly different, which makes life interesting.
We're getting into that life design again thing. I like that.
Yeah.
So moving from patterns to details, I know you've got a couple of good diagrams about wicking beds, and maybe we can start with the patterns about wicking beds and their design construction and some of the ratios you were talking about. And then we can get into the specifics about your guys' tolerances, if that works for you.
Sure. Yeah, sure does. Yep. I don't have that one pulled up just yet. Do you want me to get that one, or have you got it there?
Yeah, I've got it here. Why don't I pull it up? And this is the essentials or the Cypress plans. Which one do you want me to pull up here?
The essentials one. That's the
okay.
the basics. Yeah, if we start with that.
Okay, absolutely. So I'll just bring that up right now. And I'll make it a bit bigger. There we go. So walk us through this, if you would.
Great. So you can see, you've got a bed frame or a container of some description, and that's what that orange frame around the outside, that gives you your basics. You need to hold all the soil together, keep your plants in, all that sort of thing. So that's a pretty simple concept. You need a garden bed or a box. Inside that, you've got the soil profile at the top, which is your brown part there. Then there's the water reservoir in the bottom, which is the blue, obviously. So yeah, that's our soil there. Nice drawing skills, by the way. I'm well impressed. And then there's a white line in there through the middle. That's the barrier that stops the soil falling down, essentially, but allows moisture to come through. So that one's really key. We'll come back to that detail in a minute. But that one's really important. How you do that is part of the engineering of putting a wicking bed together. Then the other key part, of course, is on your right-hand side there, the overflow, is you need an outlet. Otherwise, the whole thing is a big pond or a pool or a bucket of water. And that's not where you want to be heading with your garden bed. And so then probably the one thing that is missing there, which is sort of a default, is by the top being open, is an inlet. So there's some sort of plumbing where you can get moisture into the reservoir and or into the bed. And so if you've got this outside in the weather, then obviously your rain's going to get in there, or you can irrigate by top watering. But we'll show you some detail on the next one of how to do a plumbing setup, or how we do a plumbing setup to make that work really well. And that's pretty much your fundamentals. The only thing missing there is some plants in the top. That's a wicking bed right there.
Brilliant. So this, I think, for everybody watching, and I think it's important is to take the patterns and the principles of this, as opposed to a wicking bed has to be rectangular. I know we've got some examples of Cooper barrels being turned into wicking beds. I've done it. Well, actually, that's funny. I guess I have built a wicking bed, because I used to do the global buckets with 5-gallon buckets and 5-gallon buckets. So I need to clarify. I actually have built some wicking beds, but even in my mind, I was like, no, I haven't done a bed. I've just done a wicking container. But it's just showing, that cognitive disconnect. But so you have a container of some way, shape, or form to hold everything together. So I think that's a great piece for everyone to understand. And then internally, we've got a few things that are important. So one is we have some sort of reservoir that allows for water to be held. And I think it's important for folks to know that if the container you have can hold water, then you're good. But if the container you have doesn't hold water, you'll have to create something to hold that water, which I know you guys have done some great work about finding a good liner, and we'll talk about that coming up. Then on top of that, you're going to have something to allow the soil not to move into the water and the water to move into the soil en masse. So it just slumps right directly into the water. Because then we've got soil that becomes totally aquatic and moves out of a terrestrial or an aerobic situation, which is an oxygen interaction, to an anaerobic or no oxygen situation. And then then you've got the soil profile, and then sort of the plumbing pieces, which is interesting. And I love this next diagram we have. You've got an overflow to make sure that it never gets too much water, because even if you're not overwatering it, because it's open to the elements, if rain comes into it or somebody leaves on a hose, you want to make sure that it's got a default so that way it doesn't overwater itself. And then on the other side, you have the ability to bring water into it so that way it fills. So just general patterns, general principles. I really like how you guys have made this very clear, really simple way of looking at this. And then of course there's always the cute, like, yeah, baby. Like
that. Yeah, that's right. It's wicking action. That's right.
Is that like an Austin Powers reference? Is that what that's to?
I reckon it is. Yeah.
Okay.
I reckon you picked it.
Good deal.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is great. I really like how this looks within the context and the framework of this. So walk us through this as well.
Sure. I might just go back one step before we do. So the other thing to note on your basics is one, you can get a lot of sideways force in a wicking bed. So when you're building your bed frame, you want to be sure that it's going to be strong enough to withstand that. It's not an active pressure out the side, but you've got a lot of weight in a wicking bed, a lot more than a standard veggie bed. So considering that you've got sideways pressure on your bed wall, so you just need to make sure that your bed frame is up to that, or you've braced it with something like that. So I've done them. This is how you learn. Is I've done converted for my beautiful sister. She had some plastic raised beds, and I was like, yeah, well, I've learned about wicking beds and we're doing it and we're going to convert it and it's great and fantastic. And we did it, and they bulged and they split at the seams because they weren't structurally strong enough. So we end up, we better put something around and brace the outside and do that. So that's just one of those things to bear in mind for the bed frame. And also, if you're talking something pretty small, you may not need a specific inlet. You definitely need your outlet, but you don't have to have an inlet if it's only a small pot or a small wicking box or something. And we've got an example we'll come to later. You don't necessarily have to have an inlet if you're just topping up the soil or something like that. If it's really small and you're cramped for space. Not that it takes much, but on those basics, that's where you get those little variations. It's not a wicking bed if it doesn't have this. It's, if it works and it keeps your plants alive, then hey, I'm a fan. That's what we're after.
That's a great piece. And bulging within beds is something that I've had to deal with a few times, where you're using long slabs of slab wood that comes off of the ends and the sides of logs, because it was available and it was there. And as we were building them, I think it was every 4 to 6 feet, we would put a brace in the middle. And in some of the more, that was on home jobs and friends and family, but on the more professional side of it, I've done threaded rods where you've got a threaded rod that actually goes through the bed and then is threaded to hold it together. So that way you don't get that battle of the bulge as you're going down. That could be like 16, 25 feet long. So it can actually hold it together. So that's a great point. That's a great point.
And putting those braces in as you go can be important if you're putting in a liner sometimes. So we find a bit of a delicate balance, and we'll come back maybe when we're talking about building one. But you can end up, if you fill your bed and then you want to put in the horizontal brace to try and pull that in, you might find it's already bulged out. And I've been in that situation where you're trying to squeeze the bed in and it's nigh on impossible unless you have something big and hydraulic, which my pockets aren't that big, so I usually don't have something on the job.
Pre-build is definitely, for me, the way it ends up happening is that pre-build, building it to take that structure, because and this is true for a number of the raised beds I did, where because of the situation and all the rest of it, we had the option to do wicking beds and I had the option to learn about them, but I had been schooled in using small diameter wood in a hugelkultur sense. And that kind of weight definitely starts to create pressure, because as you're putting the wood in and compressing and then putting soil on top, there's a huge amount of outward pressure that happens. And then of course you start getting a wetting pattern that happens to that. And now that soil is now wet as well. Whereas a liter of water is a kilogram of weight. This is a huge, tremendous amount of weight that you don't think about as you're building. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
Okay, so we're into the specifics now, and I think something that was really interesting to me is you first talked about ratios of the reservoir,
Mm-hmm.
what's in the reservoir, and ratios of the soil profile. So maybe we'll start there because there's a lot of specifics here, but I think starting with the patterns would be useful.
For sure. So your ratios fairly flexible, which is when you're first learning about wicking beds, or as human beings when we're students, lots of options for one piece of information is not what we prefer. It's like I just want one answer, and then I can, So a simple guide is half. If you've got a standard size bed or any size bed, basically you sort of go for half, 50. If you're going smaller, then go less reservoir and more soil profile. So down to 1/3 reservoir, 2/3 soil, so that you've got more growing room for your plants, because that's more important than how much water the bed can hold or the box can hold.
Mm-hmm.
Then your only real limit, as far as I know, on what your ratios can be when you start talking specific sizes is that the capillary action seems to work to about 40 centimeters through against gravity. So through soil or through the reservoir, or through most or a lot of materials, as far as I know, certainly for this context. It's about 40 centimeters. So we use that as our working maximum for the soil profile, the soil depth.
Mm-hmm.
And the tricky part to think about is that what that means is you've got 40 centimeters wicking profile from the point of saturation. So as the water level drops in the reservoir, that wicking profile shifts and moves, which isn't a bad thing. It's just something to wrap your mind around, that's where that ultimate moisture levels. And of course, in that zone, it's not all the same amount of moisture level across the whole 40 centimeters. It's less at the top. There's more at the bottom because it's adjacent to saturation. Like you're saying, the three-dimensional wetting pattern means that's going to balloon out through the soil. So at the edges, on all the edges, there's less moisture. Where you come back to the center, there's more. So it's just bearing those sorts of things in mind. So we use 40 as our maximum, 40 centimeters, and usually shoot for about 35 as a working soil profile if we can. Because then you've got a bit of variation, you've got room for a little bit of mulch at the top. It's more than enough, or it's enough for most veggies or food crops that you might be growing, bar your deep-rooted ones. And for that, you could create a deeper wicking bed or grow them in the soil if you can. And so then you can come down to specific ratios, which is probably good to touch on now, because we've got in the diagram that we've got up there, it's a 40 centimeter bed. So we use cypress sleepers, or so our wooden boards are 200 mil wide or 20 centimeters. So two of those gives us a 40 centimeter bed frame. And we split that not quite half. So we go get a little bit more soil and a little bit less reservoir. So you can see in the figures there on the left-hand side of the bed, there's a 15 centimeter reservoir and a 25 centimeter soil profile. And that, that works really well. It's not limited to that. And it's certainly one of these things that it's not it's more like a guideline than a rule. If you're building this for yourself and that Wicking Beds guy, he said it's 15 centimeters and 25, and I've got 16 and 24, if my maths is right, or the other way, it's anything within 2 to 5 centimeters variance of that it's going to work. It's still fine. The only time that you're starting to run out is when you're maxing out at the 40 centimeter range, if you like, which means, even then, a couple of centimeters at the top's running a bit dry. Your plants won't have their roots in that shallow zone because they're chasing the moisture. Prevents weed seeds from germinating so readily. So it's not the end of the world. It's not going to, your gardening isn't going to fail because you've got 42 centimeters of soil. It'll be something else that'll contribute to it not succeeding, not that. Yeah.
So do I have this right here? I was just following along, making sure I tried to grab it here. So on the larger side, general rule of thumb, half soil, half reservoir. On the smaller side, 2/3 on the soil, 1/3 on the reservoir. we've got a max for the soil profile of 40 centimeters.
Yep.
Okay.
That's it.
And
Yeah.
and is there a max for the reservoir as well?
Not that I've come across. No, not practically. I mean, the biggest beds we build are 80 centimeters tall, so four boards. And we normally do them at a half. So that would be 40 centimeters soil, 40 centimeters reservoir.
Wow.
Or occasionally, the other option you can do is if you've got a really big bed frame, is you can infill inside the bed first and then line it. And so you're changing your ratios internally, even though externally the bed frame's still the same size. It does mean you have to adjust where your plumbing is, of course, on the outside of the bed. So it can start to look a little bit different to what our diagrams and photos look like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So that gives us a couple of really great practical tips in terms of the patterns and then also the specifics. So if somebody did want to go out, they could, and they wanted to take, okay, well, 80 centimeters tall, they could do a 50-50 split. When we talk about going from larger to smaller, what's the boundary condition that takes you into a smaller bed where you'd want to go 2/3 to 1/3?
I don't really have one. It's fairly grey. It's subjective. So there's a middle zone that I don't know, but I can speak to you. So we don't build a wicking bed usually more, shallower than 40 centimeters if we're doing an install for ourselves, because your return on investment for all the energy of building a bed isn't quite high enough, but you could build one for us. And if you're starting from the other end, so we do some nice little wicking boxes, or experimenting with stuff at home, then or even something like a wine barrel or a Cooper's barrel, as you call it. There I do those at more 1/3, 2/3. So if you're talking, like a 35 centimeter square, 35 high, something like that, or if you're converting it out of a food barrel, food grade olive barrel, or oil barrel, or one of those sorts of things, then you can use your rule of thumb and just have a look and say, is this enough soil for what I want to grow in here? And use that as your guide and adjust accordingly if you need to. Yeah.
Great. So that gives us a sense of the materials, and it gives us a sense of the ratio and the depths. Can we get a little bit into some of the parts? Because there's a bit of plumbing, there's a bit of conversations here that I think is important. I think starting with the liner and then the geotextile fabric, and then maybe we can go into the plumbing in terms of the inlet and the overflow.
Yeah, certainly. It is pretty crucial. So if you don't have a waterproof container already, so if it's not a wine barrel or a plastic bucket or tub or something already, then you are going to need to line it, as you mentioned earlier. And the most common version over here, and we used to build them this way in the early days, is using what's called a builder's plastic or builder's film, and they use it in the back of retaining walls and things like that, just to keep moisture out. And it's easy enough to work with. It's very pliable, but of course it's fairly thin. It isn't rated for use with potable water, or so it's not food grade, as we call it. It's not to say that it's not that, but the plastics industry is pretty closed-mouthed on a lot of things about to do with that. So it's hard to find information, basically. So we worked to steer away from using that, and part of that concern is the food grade part, but part of it is also it's really easy to puncture, and you'd be doing 2 layers of it. You're paranoid about any sort of gravel on the outside or anything sharp. So we did some work and found a thicker liner that's used on a commercial scale for topping dams or building tailing dams and things like that. And it's 0.5 mil thick, the version that we use, and which is the thinner end of what's available in that range. And it works really well. The only thing is, it is harder to fold. It tests your origami skills, especially in colder weather, because it's nowhere near as pliable. But it's worth the effort and worth the work. And so, finding the right kind of liner as best you can is key. And when you're doing your build, treat that with the most respect, because you only want to build a wicking bed once. Doesn't matter how big it is or small it is, really. You want to build it well, carefully, once. if you try to cut some corners, or you do it quickly, or you think in the Australian way, she'll be right. You're going to either end up with a lot of sleepless nights or a very moist standard raised bed that leaks, basically, and it's not a wicking bed in the same way. So yeah, being careful with your liner is pretty crucial.
So when we're talking about liners, what are a couple of principles to take out? Because everyone who's watching this is going to have access to different material and different conversations. I know when I take a look at something like this, I think first and foremost is I want to make sure that there's no fire retardant within the liner. That's something that we find with EPDM pond liner, is that there's fire retardant, and it's usually a fungicide level fire retardant. So definitely not something you want to have in contact with water or with food. So what are some principles you would pass on? Because, you know, we're not going to have the same access to materials as you guys do. For
sure. Well, interestingly, you probably might, because our liner comes from Canada, but there you go.
So what do you guys use specifically then? And we'll start there.
It's high density polyethylene, and it's rated, so HDPE as it's called. That's the liner. And then all the other plumbing parts, we use a low density polyethylene, so LDPE. And they're all rated for potable water use. So if you can find that, that's the magic thing. And that basically means, to the best of our knowledge, and as far as the plastics industry tells us and other people have tested, those plastics that are rated to that level match what we set as the standard, which is relative, but that's okay. It's all we've got. And over time, they don't release leachates or things that aren't good for our health, essentially, as far as we know, or to a level that is of a health risk is the qualifier, you know, because we're always learning new things. You know, 50 years ago, DDT was awesome. It was, you know, now it's not so much. Okay, we shift and adjust.
Yeah.
Hopefully we make less of those mistakes over time, especially through regen ag. But yeah, if you can look for potable water use, and it's got that that's got that moniker and label to it, then that makes your job a lot easier in making a decision. And if you can't find something like that, which is very possible, anything else, you want to prime your mind to think, okay, I'm creating what's called a semi-closed system. So you're capturing everything in a wicking bed, because you're sealing it up. So anything that goes in is going to stay in, which means your food is exposed to that. So what's in the soil, what the liner's made of, what's inside the liner, what the layer you use to keep the soil out of the reservoir is made from, everything like that. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of DIY, make a wicking bed as cheap as you can from stuff you find under your house type leftover, which is cool. I don't mean that's a good thing to do if you want to experiment. And I've done a few myself and play around with it, but just being aware of the materials you're using when you're upcycling or recycling to make sure you're applying the quality filter, not just durability, but for the use that you're going to use them for. And that anything that goes into the wicking bed stays in the wicking bed and has the ability to travel through your food system and into you. So it's just being aware of those things, which is a great thing to be aware of all the time. It's broaden your gaze to not just your wicking bed, but all your life. What am I exposing myself to, or what's around that I can not be exposed to or have less to do with?
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So that takes care, I think, of the liner and gives us a sense about the material used for the fittings. As we get to the geotextile, what's that made out of, or what have you sourced before? What have been the successes and the failures? What does that look like?
The geotextile we use is a standard landscaping fabric that's used in drainage ditches. So it allows the water to move through, but keeps soil and particulates out. So it allows it to free drain. And that's a woven PET, so poly, I forget what that one is, but it's the recyclable version, the one that you can put through your recycling, so that like soda bottles or drink bottles are often made from. So it doesn't break down if it's not exposed to UV. It takes longer to break down, and it's quite a stable plastic. It is a plastic. But once it's exposed to UV, then it does start to decompose or break down, which is probably a beneficial thing, which isn't a problem in your wicking bed because it's underneath the soil. So it'll be there for a long time.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah. But other substitutes, of course, are, if you are upcycling, like shade cloth or something like that. Bearing in mind, if you don't know what it's made from, maybe do a little bit of homework if you can find out and see if it's stable or if it's releasing things or not. With a measure of common sense or reality check the intensity with which you take that. So if you're being not paranoid, overly concerned with every component that's going into the bed, there might be bigger issues. You live on the corner of a street that's really busy. I do too, on a roundabout, and there's particulates off the road coming. The bottom of my rain barrels that I catch off the roof are grey because it settles out. And it's like, well, I'm really concerned about what's in my wicking bed, but what I'm breathing, because I live near a road in inner urban Melbourne, that's, of much or is more concern. So it's about a reality check of being balanced in your approach with your ingredients and your parts.
Beautiful. Yeah. Beautiful. I think that's logical. I think that's prudent, right? It has a lot of the precautionary principle into it. Use materials that you would eat food off of. And I think if folks would take that kind of conversation, if this was made out of a plate, or better yet, a bowl that you would put hot soup in, would you feel comfortable with it? And if it passes the hot soup bowl test, then it probably passes I'll make a garden out of it.
There you go. That's a great example.
So we've covered a lot of these pieces here. The one thing I'm curious about is the 50 mil perforated Aggie pipe. I'm not familiar with the term Aggie. And then also kind of the lengths and the ratios you have in bed, and if you have that, or if that's just builder's prerogative.
Sure. So that's that'll be a bit of Australian vernacular Aggie pipe, or agricultural pipe, or drain coil as it's known. Yeah. So that's a plastic tube, and we use a slotted version, so it's got holes in it all the way, perforated, and so it allows the water to move in or out. They use it in drainage for water to move in and run it away off to wherever you want to redirect it.
Yeah, we call it drain tile here.
But yeah, right. There you go. Yeah. And we use it to get water in faster. So one of the challenges is if you're putting your hose in the inlet and you've got great water pressure and you're putting it into a wicking bed that your reservoir, for example, you use fine sand, which could work. The water's going to take the path of least resistance, which it's got a choice. Okay, do I want to move into the sand, or do I want to come back up the inlet and spray you in the face? And, depending on how fine your sand is or your reservoir, you're probably going to be wearing it rather than it moving through. So using that agricultural pipe gets the water into the reservoir quickly and then allows it to disperse from there. And so in terms of the length of that, we use a pretty scientific process of 1 meter for small beds and 2 meters for big beds. Right. And that's it. I don't know how much a meter is because it's my Adonis wingspan. That's a meter, and that's what I measure it, and then I cut it, and that's it, and away we go. So it's pretty coarse, but that works for me. Worked for us, and it's about getting the water in quickly, because the water's going to move everywhere like it does. It moves horizontally really quickly. Then, of course, then the capillary action kicks in and it's moving vertically as well as horizontally. So you don't have to worry about that. It's only about getting the water into the bed quickly, basically, so that you're minimizing your irrigation time.
So a couple of questions here. It looks like it's in the top half of the reservoir, and it looks like it's perfectly horizontal. Are those specifics that you use, or is that?
No, that's just graphic representation to make it so you can actually see it. Nice. So we put it at the bottom. We do try to get it horizontal, and then use the reservoir aggregates or the gravel or the screenings to hold it in place, and just run it, along the length of the bed. But if it's snaking through the bed, that's fine. If it's curling, that's probably still okay. Basically, the only thing you don't want it to be doing is directing straight towards the outlet so that the path of least resistance is there. But even then, your outlet still has to fill up. So it's still going to end up back in the bed before then. But yeah.
So this really takes the allow water to take the longest path. So as the water comes in through the inlet, it's going down this direction. Now this is perforated, so it will come all the way out. But if there is overflow, because I'm guessing this end is open, or do you put a
Correct.
little bit of that fabric over it so the screenings don't get in?
Just leave it open.
Yep.
A lot of people cap them, but I don't find any need to. It's less work, one less thing to do and remember. Because the water will either just, as you say, come out the end, or if it hits the screenings and starts building up inside the aggie pipe, then it'll drain out the bottom and the sides and the top as it gets full. So it just keeps moving out. Yeah, from there.
Awesome. No, this is great. So the water comes in the inlet, goes down the big O drain tile, aggie pipe. Definitely can't use that on the building site in Canada. They'll look crazy. This is not necessarily horizontal, but you try to make it as horizontal as possible. And then you leave the end of this open because, of course, you want a place for pressure to move if it's a huge amount of water that's being put in there. And this is interesting because, of course, you've got the inlet at 25 mil, 2.5 centimeter, and
that's right.
The big O pipe is double the size. So it really will allow that water to expand and move out.
That's right. Yeah. And we just slip that in. So it's not taped up. It's not sealed up. We use the screenings to hold the inlet in place inside. So it could free move, but once it's sitting in place with some screenings of gravel around it, then it stays there and that's fine.
Beautiful. Yeah. So the water comes out, the water fills up, and now it's actually going to start filling up, of course, because water finds its level. It's going to start filling up with the bed, and it's going to find its level as well, all the way into what is the overall standpipe.
That's right.
And this is a brilliant thing about what you guys do. You can actually check that standpipe to see, okay, where is that level?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the key benefit of having this overflow setup. It's one of the two key benefits, I guess, is that you can come out and check your wicking bed to see if you need to fill it up or not. You've got more discrete control or feedback for yourself on where the level's at and how long it takes for it to drop and how much it's dropping by, all those sorts of things. So you don't have to come out and put your hose in and see if it flows out quickly and, it's already full, I'll just put the hose away again, or how long you're standing there for to top it up. So that's part of the behavioral benefit of having this overflow set up. The technicality of it, I guess, because we're here, is that, wherever the water is inside the bed, that's where it is inside the standpipe. It's that Archimedes principle of thinking of a Greek man in a bath, and you put it in and it floats, and it all finds it's the same level on both inside and outside the bed. And that helps, offer that indicator of where it is all the time. Mm-hmm. The distinction, I guess, a little bit on when you're building one of these, if you're going to use this overflow setup, so it's kind of a crucial bit of detail, is that you need to put the hole in the bed and the liner when you're plumbing it through is as low as practically possible. So and the distinction is the previous image that we were looking at, where we just had the overflow straight at the line, which is the simplest version of building a wicking bed. And you could do that if you wanted to, that's fine. With all this other setup, you just set the hole at the top of the reservoir, so the maximum depth of the water, which is where your geotextile fabric is going to be, or your membrane that stops the soil falling through. That's your height, your reservoir height. And so we manage that in this version with the overflow, that we have the standpipe riser that gets trimmed back down. So you don't have to be precise in measuring where the hole is when we're putting it in the bottom of the bed frame. That's pretty close, and we get it fairly precise each time. But there's always little variables there of is the bed frame on concrete? Or is there soil I can excavate away? Or is inside the bed slightly higher than outside the bed frame with soil? And so those adjustments are possible, so that when you fit the overflow, you can trim the riser to the water height, and that's part of our build technique. Yeah, in that stage.
Yeah, sorry about that. I would say that, especially for Canada, this is really important, because you definitely don't want to leave water in this bed over winter. You want to be able to drain these out completely, or else we're going to get that expansion and contraction, or potentially burst these pipes. So being able to drain it all the way out come the fall, keeping probably that outlet down, or even moving it into the winter, so that way you can come back in the summer, put it back in, be able to hit it as you do whenever the summer finally decides to come here in Canada, and it's different all across the country, then you can jump into it and keep going forward.
Yeah, and that's good. You've touched on the other main benefit that we have is that in that overflow type, there's the elbow that's set in there isn't, it's secure, but it's not permanent. So you can adjust, you can rotate the riser, which allows you to flush out the reservoir if you needed to. So if something happened, the salts have built up in the water in the bottom of your wicking bed, or all of those sorts of things. For some reason you wanted to empty it, you can do so quite easily. And that's where this other piece of aggie pipe we've got on there, that shorter length on the inside, attached to the outlet there, we use that. That's just screwed on to the outlet setup, and I'll show you that. We might go to that photo next. And that's just to stop the screenings coming out when you do rotate that standpipe down and the water starts drawing through. That'll pull the screenings with you because they're small enough to fit through the outlet plumbing. And that perforated O pipe allows the water to move through without the screenings coming with it. It just breaks that little bit of pull that the water has on the screenings, and it's usually enough to stop them washing out as well.
So I'm guessing you don't cap that either with anything at the end. It's just because the screenings are so tight and compacted, the fines might move a little bit, but the larger screenings will stay in place.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
And you can also adjust. So if I'm emptying one out, I don't just take it and go, okay, it's standing up, and then bang, turn it on full. You let it, adjust it down a little bit. Otherwise it can even still, through that, it can still pull some of the scoria out because it's in a hurry to get out, because water loves gravity, of course. It loves to defy gravity, but it also loves gravity.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the last thing I want to touch upon here before we go on and see those standpipes up close is let's talk a little bit about screenings. Let's talk about size and source. And
sure.
You last time you talked about some successes and some failures over Vegg's lifespan and what you guys have settled on. I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, well, this is the key part, and what it is it's about the basic principle is you need something in your reservoir to hold the soil up and to keep it, one, out of the water, but to stop the whole inside of the bed collapsing down, essentially. So it needs to be structurally sound or have enough integrity and strength or offer that weight resistance or that carrying capacity to hold wet soil above it. So there's lots of things you can use. And I'll touch on some of the other variables, the other options later on, maybe. What we use is screenings, or that's what we call them here. It's a small gravel, basically. And what we found for our optimum is about 7 mil. So 0.7, averaging 7.7 or 7 mil. And that's a really nice size for balancing the capillary function, I suppose, the physics of capillary action. So if you go to really fine sand, it can wick, or the capillary action can move through quite well. But when you're putting the water into it, it takes a lot longer, or it comes back up at you. So that's a bit of an issue if you go really fine. At the other end of the spectrum, if you go really coarse, so you're talking about 20 mil plus, or even maybe 18 to 20 mil and larger, you're talking larger gravel size like that, then the pore spaces, because the particle size is big, the pore space or the airspace between those particles is also bigger, and so you get less capillary action, less effective action. And so that's where if you have smaller particle sizes, the space between them is smaller, so it's easier for the water to fill that space and to move through, and for the capillary action to be more effective over a greater height or distance than if it was larger. So that's where 7 mil is a great product for us, and it's readily available in Melbourne. So that's one of the things is, finding what your equivalent of your local resource is that works, not necessarily the rule of it must be this. So you could use 10 mil, that's fine. You can use up to 15 mil of some description, and that'll work for you. The two things that you want to bear in mind when you're sifting through potentials is, one, that it's not sharp, so it's not going to put a risk to your liner, depending on how durable your liner is. But even for ours, which is hard to puncture, and we've driven over it in the car, and I've walked on it in work boots and hit it with a pen, and it's hard to puncture. But so if it's got rounded edges, then that's a little bit better. And we moved away from, there's two types of screenings that people use commonly here in Melbourne, and they're formed from the same volcanic rock. One is called scoria, so it's the red perforated or aerated, like a honeycomb style rock that gets broken up, and we use it on tennis courts and pathways and things like that. It's a red version. And then we used to use that, gets used quite commonly still in Wicking Beds. It's called scoria, and it's good, but the edges are a little bit sharp. And so now we use a blue stone, which is the same type of stone, but it was lava that was under the soil, not on top. And it's broken up. And if you look at photos of Melbourne, and you'll see the laneways, we have bluestone or cobblestone lanes and buildings out of them, and the jail up the road's built from it. So it's a very common building material for us. So it's readily available, and we use that in the 7mm, sizing, and that's ideal because the chips on it, the corners are a little bit more rounded than scoria or other things that are available. And the only other caveat there on your material is that it's inert effectively, and this is whether you're using screenings or a different kind of like a plastic structure if you wanted, or something that's going to hold the soil up and allow the moisture to wick the capillary action. So if you're going for a gravel of some kind, you want to steer away from limestones or anything that's from stone base that could push your pH and affect your pH, something like that, which isn't an issue for us here in Melbourne, but certainly over in Perth and so Western Australia, western side of Australia, they don't have the same stone types, and so they use a lot of limestone-based gravel for paths and for drainage, which is fine for those applications. But if you start using it in your wicking bed, it's going to push your pH towards alkaline in a way that you're not going to be able to control. And so you just, design it out from the beginning is the best way.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah. I think the things that you pulled up there is great. You've got a range of like anywhere from 5 to 15 mil of screens that are rounded, not necessarily interlocking and sharp. So that way you do have surface area. Anything smaller, there's so much surface area that the water takes a really long time to move through. Anything bigger than that, the surface area reduces. So again, it doesn't have as much capillary possibility or capacity to move up. The other piece, chemically inert. So that way there's no issue of starting to change or react with the pH within the system itself. Brilliant.
Yeah, spot on. Nice summary.
I'm also making notes as we go, so it helps. Anything else we want to add to this diagram? I think this is a brilliant diagram, and I think we've pulled out some really good major principles, some good examples of each. We've gone through the soil, the reservoir, the screenings. We've gone through the liner. We've gone through the geotextile fabric. We've gone through the inlet, the outlet, making sure that you're taking them, not taking something up like PVC, which is photoreactive and will degrade in solar. So good to use things that are stable, and then using something like the drain tile, the big old tile, to help for the distribution of the water as it comes into the inlet, and also protecting screenings from coming out the outlet within that standpipe. This is great. I really appreciate this, and I think you've done a really good job of explaining this in a way that I think people can really understand this. This is
cool.
Forward.
Awesome. Yeah, that's good. Well, that's what it's all about,
Yeah. Cool. So I'm going to clear this, and we'll go on to this exploded view of the standpipe, because this is a great one that I appreciate that you guys put here.
Yeah. This is one that I find helps just to get the what's going on really, unless you're building one literally without kit. It's hard to conceptualize. You can see the image, or you see it close up, and it's like, okay, that looks like something. But when you see it in its parts here, you can say, oh, okay, so this is how this joins together, and this is how all of this works. So if we're starting from inside the bed frame to outside, which is, I'm guessing that's what that square is you've just added, which is fantastic. So if you're right on the right of screen, basically, there's our perforated aggie. You can see there's the little slots in there. That's the drain pipe. And we would screw that into the next piece. So that's a tank valve. So they use those sorts of valves on water tanks. They usually use them the other way around, I've discovered. So for someone who's used them before and we send them our kit, they stand scratching their head for a little while and, how does this work? Because we've reversed it so that we've got our the female end, the rotational parts on the outside of the bed. Yeah. And so that's the part that you want to be really careful with. This is the other key part of and the fun part. And to be honest, I don't know how many wicking beds I've built now. It's a fair few, or converted. And it's the part where you always take a deep breath and just, right, this is the one thing I'm focused on. I'm not listening. I'm not answering someone else's questions. I'm about to cut a hole in our liner, which means if I get this wrong, it's a new piece of liner, because that's it. That's the only way to do it. I don't bother with trying to patch it up or make it work. I like to sleep at night and think about other things than if someone's bed's leaking because I sort of bodged it a bit or something. So you take your time, and then you cut your tank valve through, and then where you've got the two lines, you can see there's two washers sitting there, and we actually silicone those to the liner. So when you're doing a water tank or something like that, usually they just screw those up and those washers will seal, which is possible. And if you're doing a wine barrel, for example, you can actually do that without a liner if it holds water still or holds liquid still, and just screw the soft washer on and up against the timber. And because the point of Cooper barrels or wine barrels is when they've got moisture and they swell, once you drill the hole through, that actually swells up and it seals up again. And so you don't actually need any silicone in there. But for every other bed we build with a liner, then that's where the silicone goes in. And we do it on both sides of the liner. So one washer is inside the bed, one side is inside the bed frame, but between the bed frame and the liner. And then they both get silicone and they get squeezed onto the liner to seal that up.
Okay, so actually the second line or the second washer here to the left is actually in between the bed frame and the liner.
Correct.
Okay. So I'll redraw this, and you can help me to make sure that I've done this correctly. So we've got the bed frame itself, and so the frame of the bed or the structure would actually go like this, to where the two washers are actually inside. And we've got the liner here, which I'll draw as a square again. And of course it's not open at the top, but for the sake of doing this quickly, this is how it would look. And then we've got inside this, we've got, let me just pull the line tool up here. There we go. I'll use that orange again. So we've got silicone here, and we've got silicone here.
That's right.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, so it's a little silicon sandwich, and we fit those to the two washers, and fit them on, and then you just do up that nut on the end by hand. Don't do it if you're using this sort of a kit. Don't do it too hand tight. Is fine. You don't need to get a pair of multi grips on there and really ratchet it up, because it's only a plastic thread. And I've done that before, and then you start skipping threads, and then you don't know if you've broken something. And so hand tighten is fine. Depending on your grip strength, of course, you can do it gently if you need to with a pair of pliers or something. Or actually, that'll be on the one on the inside.
Oh, so you're hand tightening the outside, the inside one. Gotcha.
Inside, yeah. So the outside one is fixed, and we actually end up screwing that to the bed frame so that it doesn't turn when you rotate the elbow.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yep. So then at that point, you should be waterproof, depending on the silicone you're using. We use one that's got a fast curing time. And food grade or potable water, I should say. Nice. So you can let it cure. You can wait, 15 minutes or something if you want to. We just keep on going because it's already, once it's sealed, the silicone's excluding, and we use a lot of silicone. Like I'm talking, you fill the washer face with a nice big silicone worm, and when it goes on and you press it out, it squeezes out the side, so it's sealing around the edge of the washers as well. Because I like doing wicking beds, and I like doing them once, and then you move on to the next thing. and so it seals up, and so you're good to go, and you keep going on our builds. We're careful, not rough with that area when you're putting the screenings in, but it's waterproof already. And then that next part is the elbow on the outside. So that's a male to female elbow that you can see there. And that then screws into the tank valve head. And that is what offers you the flexibility for rotating, for flushing out your bed, for dropping your level if it's if you don't want to change the standpipe itself and you just rotate, then you're effectively lowering the overall water level, the ultimate water level inside the bed. So we do that in our winter because it's not as wintry as yours. It's not really winter. It's just a cooler time of year.
Yeah.
And then you've got the irrigation riser in the top there. And that's the one, we would build this bed. We use Teflon tape. That's the only thing that's missing in that image is plumber's tape on all the threads, of course, to seal them up. So we would build this, put this in, and build the bed. And then when you set your final water height, when you fill the reservoir with screenings and with water, so you end up with that nice and level, and the water finds its level, of course, and that level will be inside the standpipe as well. And once that's set, once you've got that and you're happy with it, it's not too wet, it's not too dry, then you're right to cut, if it's needed, you cut the riser at that water level, where the water level is inside the riser, and that sets the height. So that any time the bed fills that high, it comes up in the riser and it's going to spill out. So it doesn't go any higher inside the bed.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. No, great example of people who've done it a ton of times and they know where the issues are, right? They know one of the major issues is making sure that things can seal and seal well, making sure that you want to do this once, not multiple times. And making sure that you use things like plumber's tape so that way you have this great seal and you've got it for, the length, span, and time that you've got your bed for. So
that's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you just use a little bit on the tail end of that elbow as well, just for full disclosure. That Teflon tape would have one little red arrow down to the part of the elbow.
Yeah, right down to here.
Yeah. Anywhere you're joining, if you do your homework and have a look, then it'll show you where. That's it. Yeah.
Perfect. No, this is great because this helps us to understand how you guys do it as professionals, put it all together, and then anybody can pick it up. I think the thing here is that your standpipe height is going to be dependent upon the level of the reservoir you want to keep. So chances are that standpipe is probably going to go up to the geotextile or just below? Where do you guys set that standpipe height?
At the geotextile height.
Right. Okay.
So when we're building the bed, and it's really we don't even have to measure, which is awesome. This is why I'm a big fan of this system. Is you fill up your bed with screenings, you add in the water. If you want to save time, do both of those things at once, so you're not standing around waiting for the hose to fill the bed. And then as it gets to the top, and you set your height, so we would be measuring then, and we go, okay, it's a 25 centimeter reservoir, say we're shooting for, and we measure down from the top to get that. Okay, we've got 35 as our soil profile. Great, this is the height we want. We would adjust the water level either by adding a few more screenings if it's too wet, so we get a little bit more, a fraction drier there, or take some of the water out, and to adjust that water level. And then when we're happy with the moisture level at that height, then wherever the water level is in the pipe, then bang, we cut right there, cut the pipe to that level. So you're using the water to tell you where, as your ultimate level guide, to figure that out.
So you might actually do this before you put the soil in.
Definitely before you put the soil in.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you start putting the soil in and you remember you haven't cut the riser, you better cut the riser quick because the moisture is already moving into the soil. So the water level in the standpipe's dropping. So you don't know where your level is again, which, to be fair, isn't a deal breaker. You can still move your soil aside, measure inside from the top of your bed to where your reservoir height is. So, okay, it's 33 centimeters. Measure the outside, 33 down, cut it. You're still going to be within, safe working space.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, I think that covers a lot of the technical details here. I think we'll show the example of the Cooper barrel, the wine barrel kit, just to show people what it looks like. And then if we can move on to some of the photos that you brought to show some of the specifics about anti-tampering and just what they look like. I think that'd be a nice way to finish up here. So we have this last photo of the wine barrel kit, which is great. It's just so simple, easy, really well put together, nice reuse, of course, with the barrel itself, and pretty innocuous, looking at it, you wouldn't think too much of it.
Yeah, it's really simple and straightforward. I'd like to be doing more of them. I've got a couple that I use at home that I have. And yeah, it's really straightforward. you can just, for that particular setup, the riser, we don't even have to trim it. Like, it's just the right height. If you go in between the two metal bands at the bottom, and most Cooper barrels have there's a little square part where there's metal bands, vertical and horizontal. You go straight through there, seal it up, and away you go. It's really easy. And they look great.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Great. I think I'm going to stop sharing, and then we'll get you to share as well. We'll go through some of your examples, and I think we'll end off with some of the questions we did last time, questions about, are there any areas or any examples or situations where wicking beds aren't a good place? And we talked a little bit about crops, so that'll be a bit of a cliffhanger for folks to stick around to the end.
Yeah.
And then, things about maintenance. But I'd love to see some of those examples, because they are, quite stunning in terms of what people are able to create.
Yeah, well, let me go on and share the screen here and make sure this works. We should be there. You've got that one there? Great. This was an install we did. I'll just flip to the next image. So that's all four you can see there. It's in a public space, as you can probably tell, in a big mall area, a big supermarket behind it. And it was a community event that we did. And one of the pressures, of course, one of the values of the job and the install is that it's a public space. One of the pressures is that it's a public space, which means you get people fiddling with things because they like to fiddle. People are getting interested in and want to explore different things. So the two details here that I'll show you in this one are, if I can draw maybe as close as efficient as you can, Javan, that down here on our outlet setup, you can see the irrigation pipe or the riser in here. That's it there. And then we've fitted two essentially anti-tamper blocks on the outside. So you can't actually rotate that one almost at all in any given time. But the maintenance people who could come through, use their impact driver, it's not a screw through there. It's a bugle headed screw. So it's, landscape grade type things, not one you'd have in your pocket. You can come through and remove one of those blocks and then tip the riser over and have the water flush out if you needed to on an annual basis. If something happened, someone spills a bucket of paint in here or something like that. All sorts of things happen in public spaces. And so that's what's happening in those ones. And then on the top of the bed there, you can see, this is just one little feature that we do on some of our beds, is this one here is a seat top for people to sit on, of course, because it's public space and they want people to engage with the space. I've got my drawings on this still. That's all right.
You just hit the clear button at the top and that'll take care of it.
Oh yeah, nice. Clear all drawing. There we go. Beautiful. Thank you. So yeah, that was a good public space job that we did. And those were in for 4 months, and then they got moved to some local neighborhood houses so they can garden in them permanently, which is a nice community, closing the loop,
And there's a detail here that I was going to remark upon, but you brought it up, is that these are actually built in such a way that you could bring in forks and move them with a skid steer or a loader. That's right. Yeah. So they've actually got a solid base on them, and you can see they're on the skids there, so that you could lift them and move them. Not all our beds are built that way, because you don't need to have a base in a bed unless you were going to move it. And if you're going to move it, then you need to take all the engineering into account, like you touched on back in the beginning, which is a litre of water is a kilogram, plus your screenings, plus your wet soil. So you're talking, these were coming in around a bit over, I think they were 1 3/4 or nudging towards 2 ton each. And they're only 2.4 by 1.2 beds. So not huge, good sized beds, but it's a lot of weight to start moving around. Yeah. And for all of the Americans that are listening and trying to figure out what is that in imperial, I recommend you learn metric. Generally, I was born and raised in a family and with a father who worked in construction, so I know imperial, I know footage, but I tell you, trying to convert half inches into inches into like, it's just, when you finally get to the deca system, you're like, well, this makes logical sense. I'm sure I will get backlash from that, but seriously, you need to start actively individually learning metrics, so that way you can start spreading it grassroots level up. My
That's how it
goodness,
all happens.
what is there, like 2 or 3 countries left in the world that still hang on to Imperial? It's just like, come on.
Yeah.
Deca systems, folks. Deca.
Yeah. It certainly makes it easier. Well, I only know one system, so I can't speak to either.
I can speak to it. It's a terrible thing to have in your mind of both. But anyways.
I know I'm no good at math, so I don't like doing the conversion the other way. That's for sure.
Yeah. So what else do we have here to show folks?
We've got, this is a private yard that we did. This is a slightly different build type to the schematic we were looking at earlier. So you can see here, so this is a version that we do, which is called our top shelf. So all the timber is dressed here, which means we add these guys here. Mm-hmm. These braces on the outside are ornamental, not structural. They're hiding the joins so the screw joins, there's a row of screws in the joins down there and down there. So anyway, you see one of these, there's a join underneath it basically. Yeah. But you can see just down here in this corner, there's the wicking overflow. Mm-hmm. And the other secret in here is this is another wicking overflow back here. That's an ordinary garden tap in case you can't see the detail. But what that means is these beds are actually 3 beds in one. Yeah. If my perspective's right, which that doesn't look right, but that's okay.
That's pretty close.
So they're all, and this was a pretty big install or a reasonable size for a yard. It was 2/3 of the yard space, but that's where they're divided internally with timber below the soil level. So you don't know it's there when you're gardening, but they've all got their own outlet. So this one had its outlet down here, and the end beds have got their outlet on the far corner. There's another outlet for the internal bed there. And it allowed for all this big entertaining space in the middle, which was an important part for the client. Yeah, and that's tops as well, of course. Yeah. Down the other end of the spectrum, we've got. Hang on, let me turn off my drawing. There's this one here. So this is one of our little wicking boxes. This is it's about 35 centimeters square. So what's that? Just over a foot square and about the same height. Yeah. And there's our overflow right there, front and center. Little dwarf peach. I ate the one peach that it had off there last year, and it was beautiful. So yeah, size isn't an issue. It's just about how you make it work. And then the other point in there, I guess, is down here, sneakily in the corner. Not just managed to get itself in the photo is a polystyrene box. So veggie boxes that you get fruit and veg delivered in. They're really easy to convert and really cheap to turn into a wicking bed or a wicking box. They do decay in sunlight, so you need to protect them or something like that. But for a balcony spot, a 2-person or 1 person can lift and move them. And so they work quite well for green space. I think there's a couple of really old beetroot left in there because I haven't got around to cleaning them out yet.
This is great. This shows a detail that I'm glad we get to see. The way that you guys connect your ends is shown here really nicely with having a structural vertical support that brings the side pieces. You called them, what did you call them, sliders before or something?
Oh, vertical brace. Yep. So these ones you mean in this image?
Right. But in this one, it's internal. And it's nice to see.
That's right, yeah. So that's the corner posts that we have. So we actually use on our bigger beds. Let me see if I can draw this up for you. On our bigger beds, we will use a triangular corner post. So it's like this, which makes fitting the liner a lot easier than a square one.
Oh, great point.
Because fitting around the liner around these right angles in here and in the bottom gets really pinchy, especially in a small box like this one. So it gets really fiddly. So I don't recommend really deep, really narrow beds because, of course you can do it. It's just fiddly when you're doing it. So you just need to take your time and not drink too much coffee beforehand so that you're calm, patient. And if it doesn't work, try it again. It's basically how that goes. And then you can see here, we've screwed in the tank head to the bed there. So that wasn't in the previous image. So that when you're rotating the riser, either direction, only the riser and the elbow turn, these two here. Mm-hmm. The tank valve here doesn't rotate because if that rotates, you run the risk of breaking your silicon seal on the inside. And away you go. You've got a different job to do this weekend, which is rebuild your wicking bed.
Right. So this is insurance. These 2 screws are insurance that way you never break the seal of the silicone.
That's right. Yep. and make sure they're not too long that you go in through your liner. So anything you fix into your bed, this is a thing, you know, we've done it, or we can do it.
This is experience talking right now. I know.
Oh yeah. Yeah. You need to know the thickness of your bed frame and use screws that are less than that, or go in, you know, only be mucking around in an area above your water reservoir. So in this example, there's the risers there. So I can pretty much say the water reservoir is about that height inside this box. So anything I do up in here, no problem. Maybe not off the side, but anything in there doesn't matter too much if I go through into the soil profile or through the liner. But below, don't do anything down here, because you're running the risk of punching a hole, and then you start again, which you don't want to do if you don't need to. So this example, this again, another nice seat top on the top. That's just an aftermarket addition that we do, or another option, but it's this is our standard build bed size. So 3 sleepers high, and there's the outlet there in the shadow. So that's pretty standard looking bed.
So this would be, that would be 60 centimeters high, because these are 20 centimeter
that's right.
sleepers.
Yep. That's exactly right.
Why are they called sleepers? That's just one of those weird things I
don't know.
I'm curious about.
I'll have to look that up. Yeah, that's what we call them here. I don't know why. They're timber boards. What do you guys call them over there?
Boards.
Right.
Planks, boards.
How non-confusing. That's good.
Well, there's lots of things about Canada that's confusing, but boards and planks, and I think that's true of the States too. It's boards, planks, things of that.
Right. Yep. Yeah, cool. And then this last one here is just a little, I just took this morning before we came on the air. This is our little sample beds out the front of the warehouse here. Nice. There's our wine barrel, of course. It's converted. It's got some broad beans coming through, some fig in there. These ones are all movable, because we've got a forklift here, so we can move them around if we need to. Of a few different heights, of course, different demonstrations. And then, you know, this first one that's got the flowers and things in is our indigenous food bed. So it's all Aussie edibles in there, which is pretty nice. And ornamental Aussies. So yeah, which is fun, which probably leads us on nicely to me stopping sharing the screen like that and talking about crops, eh?
Yeah. So crops or situations or places where you found, I mean, we'll start with places and we'll move to crops. We'll pattern to detail again. Yep. Let's start with places or situations where you found that wicking beds aren't a good fit.
Yeah, so there's not many places, and I know I sound like a pretty devotee when I say that, is everywhere is suitable for a wicking bed, but that's certainly not what I'm saying, is because there's 2 considerations. One is, maybe there's 3. So the inputs that you need to build one in the first place. So the extra infrastructure and technical understanding to pull one off, which if I can do it, anyone can learn to do it. But it's just a matter of taking time and care. So if you're not up to par on that, or you don't feel confident, then maybe a bit more homework will get you across the line in that example. Then there's situations like the public space one. It can be a bit of an issue where you've got people interfering. So if you've got a consequence where someone can flush out the overflow, 1, your bed's empty, but 2, you've got hundreds of litres of water into a space that you might not have catered for in one place or one time. So there's that. But that's management. That's not really a wicking bed inappropriateness. That's a management issue for a larger pattern or something, that context that's going on around it. Weight is certainly an issue. So if you're looking at putting them on the balcony or in a place or a rooftop garden or something like that, then you definitely want to do a bit of homework on your engineering and the weight loading. I mean, you know, most apartment balconies and things are engineered to hold, I don't know, 6, 8, 10 people if you're having a party or something like that. So you're sort of getting close to what you could achieve in a garden bed weight-wise if you had a group of your biggest friends there, you know. So, but it's still worth being aware of that sort of situation. But there's not too many places where it's, oh, no, I wouldn't put a wicking bed there. I don't recall ever saying that, but then I don't say many things that are either black or white or yes or no. It's usually, well, you could, but maybe you want to think about. Yeah.
And I think that's a bit of the variability here. Weight, I think, is a big category. So if you don't have the weight, or if you don't have the ground beneath you, it's a consideration. If you're on another type of structure, you may want to consider looking at the wicking bed and seeing if it's a good fit. Something else that you brought up last time, which is interesting, is reasons for wicking beds. So this is kind of for and against. If you're in a situation, or the people who are managing the system, drip irrigation or irrigation as a rule is going to be a problem, wicking beds could be a good solution, right? Instead of, this happens a lot within regenerative agriculture and permaculture. It ends up becoming a grocery store, a corner store, where people go, okay, well, I'll take a wicking bed, and I'll take a herb spiral, take a couple of horticulture, and then bam, 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 all of a sudden they're all over the place. Whereas when you're taking a look at a matrix of solutions and you say, okay, well, if you're doing, let's say, a community install or a school install, these types of solutions make really good sense because the maintenance factor is quite a bit lower. And so the chances of success are higher, especially over areas where, let's say, there's a bunch of individuals, especially over breaks. And I think this is the big thing when I'm working with schools. There's this huge break during the summer, and it's really difficult to keep a garden managed and make sure that the plumbing and everything's working well, et cetera. So having some solutions that work and make good sense, keep that thing alive over the span where maintenance might be problematic.
Absolutely. And it's again, it's possibly one of the understated parts of or a benefit of a wicking bed is that if you go away on holidays, or if it's a school situation or a community garden situation or something like that, and you're going to tap someone on the shoulder and say, hey, can you come around and check on my veggies or water the garden for me while I'm away for 2 weeks, and I'll throw you some produce when I get back. It's as easy as collecting the mail. Like, really, it's pick up a tap. If this is lower than here, pick up the hose, fill it. When the water comes out there, stop and walk away. You don't have to know anything about gardening at all, because it's just a physical activity until a result happens. And so it really makes that very readily accessible, which is key.
Totally. I had a student from Denmark. She was in a public situation, and we were working on a site for her, and she had this situation where, and I experienced this with a site that I had some working with. I didn't deal with the situation, but I was helped with a site over in Victoria, a site called Spring Ridge Commons, created by Jeff Johnson and managed by a host of incredible people. I barely had a finger into it, but they had a number of grapevines that they tried to start over and through the arbor. But there's this joke in the area that Spring Ridge Commons is in called Fernwood, which is that the plant, the national plant of the neighborhood should be milk thistle, because it's the only thing that regenerates the liver because of the amount of drinking that happens in this neighborhood. And they could never get a grapevine to establish because people would just pull it down because they were trying to grab and climb onto the arbor, and they'd always pull it out. So it was finally decided to put a chaperone plant, like a very thorny sea buckthorn, so that way it had some proof over it. And this Denmark student, I was explaining this to them via text because it's an online course, and they sent back, it's like, oh, and they had this word, and it's idiot proof, to make something idiot proof. And I said, can you record yourself and send it to me so I can learn it and understand it? Because I use it now all the time.
Right. Oh yeah.
That's the great thing about English. English sneaks up behind other languages, hits them over the head, and steals all their words. And so it's hoofde proof, which is the way she said it, just like, and I love that it's not just quite idiot proof, it's like moron proof, or like it's got a lot more emphasis to it. It was good. It was like hoofde proof. So whenever I hear about these things, and it's like putting in the little anti-tampering sides on either side, or getting a friend to come and water the garden, it's like, don't worry, it's hoofde proof. You could put as much water into it as you wanted. You couldn't overwater it because the bed itself manages the overwatering issue, which I know I've had friends come and water pots and plants and came back and been like, that's dead. Thanks for coming. They're like, I came all the time. I watered all the time.
Yeah.
It was good. It was a plant I kept.
For how long, and which ones did you miss when you did it? Because I know, I do that. I've been watering plants for as long as I've been getting paid to do anything in my life, basically. And I still miss ones occasionally in my backyard. It's like, that happens because you're too busy not being present enough. So yeah, wicking bed really helps just smooth that out for you.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the two last things I want to touch upon is crops. And so crops, and we could probably take it from a principle perspective to start off with, crops that need areas or times when dry is necessary for the potential of the curing process or the growing process would probably not be a good fit. So if folks took that principle first, they can probably figure out some of the crops that aren't a good fit, but I'll let you talk about those specifically.
Yeah, for sure. So that's it's the reverse of the other end of understanding what's happening inside your wicking bed, I guess, which is constant moisture or stable moisture is a better way of putting it. So learning your crop types and thinking, it's not a negative thing of this shouldn't be in there because it won't do well, because there's people who do grow great garlic in wicking beds. But the overall consensus or way of thinking about it is garlic needs a drier end of the season to run to bulb. So wicking beds don't inherently offer that. You might be able to manage that by turning your standpipe over and drying out the soil and effectively not running it as a wicking bed anywhere near as much. But that's tweaks and tips along the way, down in the detail part. That's learning and educating yourself and managing that for your unique situation, which is key to everything, is doing it that way, but starting more broadly. So, I'd sort of guide our first decision point, if there's a bifurcation, is what are the things that need lots of water to produce well, and what are the things that don't? So anything that doesn't could potentially go in the ground, all other things being equal. So if you want to grow your potatoes, they're probably better off in the ground. They might do really well in your wicking bed, but if you can grow them in the ground, or your cucurbits, so pumpkins or things like that, if you can have them in the ground and let them sprawl and run, then have them there. Leafy greens, on the other hand, as soon as it starts getting warm, your lettuce goes from this to this and this to this, and it's falling down. And whereas, put them in a wicking bed and they stand up all through summer, as long as they've got the moisture there. So that's sort of the two ends of that, where you start to guide yourself and go from there. And more often you'll have more things that you want to grow than you have bed space for, whether that's a wicking bed or not. So you're selecting. So I think about it, or describe it as your wicking bed being prime real estate, prime growing real estate. So you want to choose the things that need it most, and the things that you want to make sure you get the most produce from, that need water to produce well. So if you're growing, like watermelons, for example, or tomatoes, or those sorts of water sensitive crops, then put them in there. And even if they sprawl like watermelons, then you've got the crown in the wicking bed, in your bed, run it over the side and across to your lawn, or across, if you've even got lawn, across the mulch path, wherever it is, so that it's still getting the benefit of of the moisture levels without taking up all your real estate, all the surface area in your wicking bed. But I haven't come across too many crops that are an absolute no for being in wicking beds, because it's supporting plant growth, and plants are, relatively speaking, plants are plants, they all operate in a pretty similar sort of fashion. Then I guess the management part of crop selection after that is if you're going for a perennial type setup, then use mostly perennials in the majority in there, or if you're going for an annual type setup, then go more with annuals. So for example, not connecting or planting a citrus tree in where you've got your leafy greens that you're harvesting and disturbing the citrus roots at the surface level continually or throughout the season, because that's no good for your citrus. And the other part of that is, of course, a perennial small tree, and I'd only put, relatively small ones in a wicking setup, is that they're going to get their roots through like really quick, and they're going to love it. There's food, there's water, but they're going to dominate that system, whatever size it is. So you need to be aware of that when you want to put other crops in with them, is that the citrus is still going to take the lion's share, or the small tree that's in there is still going to take the lion's share, and reduce the benefit that might be offered to other mixed crops that you might have incorporated in. And I guess I'd qualify that just to say that's not against mixed grouped planting or diversity. I'm absolutely pro diversity. Mix it up, put different things in, have your beneficials in there as well. Beneficial, say companion planting, those sorts of things, so that your veggie bed or your production ecosystem is rich and diverse. And that's the same in your wicking bed. It's the same beside your wicking bed. It's the same for your whole garden if you can, or anywhere you go, anywhere you can sneak some plants in, then go for diversity.
Beautiful, beautiful, mate. I know we've been going for about an hour and a half, and I really appreciate your time. I don't want to push you any
pleasure.
further, but I just want to say thank you so much for your time. I've got a bunch of other questions and conversations, and maybe we'll do a round two and talk about that a little bit more, because you've got so much to offer and you've had a lot of experience here. But really thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and I think the three things I want to end off with are two really good resources you spoke about. You spoke about a great study called Evaluating the Efficiency of Wicking Bed Irrigation Systems for Small-Scale Urban Agriculture, that folks can find on your guys' website, that goes a little bit into the science, which I found fascinating to look at and dive into. I really appreciate that. And we'll get you to tell folks the website in a second here. And then the other one was Colin Austin out of Adelaide in Southern Australia, which he claims to be the one who came up with the concept of wicking beds, and has quite a bit of information, kind of a serial website builder who starts one and gets excited and then doesn't. But it seems like there's some great information out there. Was there anything else you wanted to add to that, or tell us a little bit about the veg wicking bed site, and just let people know?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, all the design we've gone through is what we found works for us and our circumstance, and we know is repeatable. We've handed it on to enough people who've never done it before, and they come back and say, it really worked. It works really well. It's great. I can't believe the results. So, that's the qualifier for our part, because there's lots of ways to do it. So don't be shy to do some research and try what might be appropriate for your space and what you want to do. Colin's got some great resources on there, and including, funky versions of media-less Reservoir. So it's all soil, but do your homework, because, understanding anaerobic chemistry and soil chemistry is a bit more complex, and there's a bit to it. So, if you do your homework and explore that sort of stuff, then by all means, go and give it a try. Run two side by side and see how it goes for that sort of comparison. And if you're looking for the hints and tips for our resources, and there's all our conversion videos, so the step-by-step process of using our kit, which is the same, goes through all those principles as well, is all those videos are online and free already. So you can find them and watch those. You're just stuck with another half an hour of watching me talk to you, basically. But, it's worth it, because you'll build a wicking bed out of it if you want to. So you'll be right. And that's wickingbeds.com.au. Of course.
wickingbeds.com.au. Brilliant. Brilliant. Yeah. I think the thing that I've taken away most in this situation, Jeremy, and I really appreciate how you presented it, is that this definitely is a tool in the tool belt for folks that are looking at growing their own food, being more regenerative, starting to create grocery store landscapes where, instead of going to the store, it's their landscape and they have aisles which they go and they shop through. Is that there are certain areas and certain places that are appropriate. And so crops or areas close to the house, you have a high turnover or a high value crop, things that take a little bit more management that maybe your lifestyle doesn't afford it. Great use of wicking bed. Places where we have structure underneath, great place for wicking bed. When you're looking at something as a field crop where you're doing a lot of it, chances are you're probably going to get a cost performance issue where you're probably going to drop off, where building the wicking beds to get the potatoes of 1 year that's going to feed a family of 4, probably want to go to a field situation and start to learn a little bit more about that, just because of that price performance index. So like the zone conversation in permaculture, where zone 1 is where we do a lot of transactions, a lot of interactions, a lot of frequency of usage, tends to be a place where wicking bed works well. Back into zone 4, don't really see all that much, probably not a good situation or conversation. So I appreciate how you demonstrated that, and you show that through the design of the bed itself.
Yeah, thank you. Pleasure. And I think the only other thing I'd add to there is that if you're going for a market or a field type thing, there's wicking versions, there's in-ground versions. Once you get some of those principles in your mind, you basically line a swale and plant into it, and you're effectively it's a wicking process or something. You're kind of hybridizing things, and Colin's done lots of that sort of, Colin Austin, lots of those sorts of experiments. And but definitely the bigger the investment, the more return, the more daily use type, scenario is what you're after. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Anything else you want to let people know or call them to action on a specific video or something of yours?
Not specifically, no. Just go and check us out. If you've got any questions, then hit us up. If there's something that doesn't make sense, it seems like we've said something here and something else here, then it's probably true, because I'm a big fan of talking in paradox. But just ask me to clarify, and we'll get back to you. No problem.
Jeremy, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, mate.
Pleasure, Javan. Thank you.
Everybody, this has been Jeremy Prentice of Very Edible Gardens, talking to you guys all about wicking beds. If you want to see more of these types of videos, let me know in the comments below. If you have any questions for Jeremy, feel free to put them in the comments below. Make sure to hit the like button. Make sure to hit the subscribe button. Make sure to hit the bell button, because YouTube wants you to click 3 times. It apparently allows you to get home, because there's no place like home. There's no place like home. And if you do want to help the show continue and support it, there's a donation button below. Thanks so much. And as usual, be fruitful and multiply.